life of Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the 13th Legion, is among the most thoroughly recorded of his kind. Imperial iterators spread his story widely, shaping it into a narrative both instructive and enduring. Though many details have been embellished across millennia, certain elements remain consistent beneath the weight of propaganda and retelling. According to Imperial doctrine, the Emperor of Mankind injured 20 Primarchs using his own genetic material, crafting each with distinct abilities enhanced through the forces of the Immaterium. Before their development could be completed, the ruinous powers intervened, scattering the Primarchs across the galaxy within their gestation capsules. Some of these vessels were compromised during their passage through the warp, allowing its energies to seep inside. The long-term consequences of this exposure would only become clear much later. Over spans ranging from decades to centuries, the capsules came to rest on distant human worlds. Each of these planets shaped its foundling through circumstance and culture, producing figures whose paths would diverge into greatness or ruin. One such capsule descended upon Macragge, a world on the eastern fringe. Though austere in climate, Macragge possessed a stable society rooted in discipline and governance, remnants of an older human empire that had endured the Age of Strife, with much of its infrastructure intact. Macragge's people retained limited warp-capable vessels and continued to maintain contact with nearby systems despite the storms that plagued interstellar travel. This preserved a sense of connection to humanity beyond their world. When a group of nobles discovered the fallen capsule during a hunt, they recognized it as advanced technology rather than superstition. Inside, they found a child of perfect human form, surrounded by a radiant aura. The infant was presented to Connor Guilliman, one of the ruling consuls of Macragge, who adopted him and named him Roboute. The child matured rapidly. By the age of 10, he had surpassed the knowledge of his tutors, demonstrating exceptional aptitude in history, science, and philosophy. His memory was flawless, and his reasoning allowed him to draw precise conclusions from limited information. His most notable talent, however, was in warfare, a discipline held in high regard on Macragge. Upon reaching maturity, Roboute was given command of a military expedition to Illyrium, a region of fragmented states and constant conflict. His campaign there was decisive, securing both victory and the respect of the local warrior bands. Yet upon returning to Macragge Civitas, he found the capital in chaos. During his absence, Connor's co-consul, Galan, had staged a coup. Supported by elements of the aristocracy who opposed Connor's reforms, Galan sought sole control. These reforms had challenged the entrenched power of noble families, forcing them to improve the conditions of their laborers and invest in public infrastructure. While popular among the common people, these changes had generated resentment among the ruling class. As Roboute approached the city, he encountered widespread destruction and fleeing citizens. Reports confirmed that Galan's forces had attacked the Senate House, while unrest spread through the streets. Guilliman advanced without delay, ordering his troops to restore order while he pressed toward the center of the conflict. By the time he had reached the Senate, the building was in ruins. Within its remains, Roboute found his adoptive father Connor mortally wounded after days of resistance. Accounts state that Connor revealed the extent of the betrayal before his death. Guilliman's response was swift and uncompromising. With support from both his forces and the citizens, crushed the rebellion, executed its leaders, and imposed harsh penalties on those involved. Order was restored, and Roboute Guilliman assumed full authority as the sole consul of Macragge. He dismantled the remaining aristocratic structures and redistributed power. Lands and titles were stripped from former elites, and a new system was established based on merit and service. Economic reforms followed, including the broader distribution of advanced technologies previously restricted to the upper class. The military was reorganized into a disciplined and effective force. Under Guilliman's leadership, Macragge entered a period of stability and growth. Around this time, the Emperor's fleet reached the nearby world of Espandor and learned of Macragge and its ruler. Recognizing Guilliman as one of his last Primarchs, the Emperor set course for the system. However, violent warp disturbances delayed that journey for several years. By the time contact was made, Macragge had transformed into a unified and prosperous world. Guilliman had already begun expanding his influence beyond the planet, establishing trade routes and securing neighboring systems, drawing inspirations from fragments of ancient human history. He envisioned a broader domain, which he named Ultramar. When the Emperor finally arrived, he found a functioning interstellar network already in place. Guilliman accepted his true origins without hesitation and pledged his loyalty. His administrative skill and strategic insights were immediately evident, marking him as a leader capable of larger-scale organization and governance. Guilliman was granted command of the 13th Legion, known as the Warborn. His integration into the Legion was efficient, supported by his ability to articulate a clear vision for its role in the Great Crusade. Under his leadership, the Legion underwent significant transformation. He expanded its scope beyond a conventional fighting force, viewing it as part of a larger system that included logistics, infrastructure, and population support. This approach ensured long-term sustainability and effectiveness. Guilliman also began developing Ultramar as a stable base of operations, extending its network across multiple systems. Guilliman reorganized the Legion's structure using detailed analysis of both its history and that of other Imperial forces. The resulting system emphasized discipline, adaptability, and careful planning. Practical combat skills were balanced with strategic foresight, forming a doctrine that integrated both elements equally. The Legion adopted a merit-based structure, rewarding achievement while maintaining strict adherence to hierarchy. Individual lives were not treated as expendable without purpose, reflecting Guilliman's belief in the value of each warrior. These changes were reflected visually as well. The Legion adopted a blue and gold color scheme, along with the Ultima symbol, linking it to the realm of Ultramar. Under Guilliman's leadership, the 13th Legion became the Ultramarines, embodying both military precision and the administrative ideals of their Primarch. With Macragge established as his forward base of operations, Roboute Guilliman was granted independent crusade command over the surrounding region by the Emperor himself. From there, he began a new wave of conquests. His 12th Expeditionary Fleet was reformed under his command and strengthened with modern warships from Mars, provided as a special favor from the Emperor. The newly named Ultramarines wasted little time. From Macragge, they expanded rapidly, identifying human worlds suitable for Imperial compliance and marking hostile Xenos strongholds for destruction. For nearly a Terran century, interrupted only when summoned to larger campaigns by the Emperor's will, the 12th Expeditionary Fleet ranged across the eastern reaches of the galaxy. Its advance stretched northward to the dead expanse beyond the Dominion of Storms, and east and south to Ultima Thule, where the stars thinned into the darkness of the extragalactic void. During this era, some records claim that the Ultramarines liberated more human-settled worlds than the forces of any other single Primarch. The worlds Guilliman brought into the Imperium benefited from his deep commitment to ordered and efficient government. Compliance did not end with conquest. Once a world was brought into Imperial rule, the Ultramarines worked to stabilize it, establish self-sustaining defenses, and ensure that the Imperial truth, industry, and administration took firm root. This method served a practical purpose, as well as an ideological one. Each world secured behind the 13th Legion became part of a wider chain of supply, recruitment, and reinforcement. As a result, the Ultramarines were able to sustain the speed and range of their campaigns with remarkable consistency. As their victories increased, so too did the size of the Legion. Even before Guilliman's return, the 13th had been careful with its losses and capable of steady expansion, aided by the resilience of its gene seed under rapid replication. With Guilliman's vision, organizational genius, and genetic material now available to improve the Legion's gene stocks, its growth became extraordinary. Within months of the Legion's establishment on Macragge, the first new recruits arrived at the Fortress of Hera, the Ultramarines' fortress monastery and headquarters. From that point onward, the process of expansion never truly ceased. Recruits came not only from Macragge and the surrounding 500 worlds of Ultramar, but also from scores of planets and colonies conquered by Guilliman's fleets. The selection process remained strict and meritocratic. Only the strongest and most capable adolescent candidates were chosen, judged by both physical and mental standards. Yet, the reach of the recruitment system was so vast that the Ultramarines' intake surpassed that of any other single legion. This growth was strengthened further by their avoidance of unnecessary attrition. The larger the force they could bring to a compliance action, the more overwhelming their advantage became, and the fewer casualties they tended to suffer. There were still brutal wars, of course. The Ultramarines fought savage orc empires, the Tanaril, and other terrifying Xenos threats. In such campaigns, heavy losses could not always be avoided. Even then, the Legion's size and recruitment capacity gave it remarkable resilience. Casualties that would have crippled other forces could often be replaced within a few Terran years. Across the eastern galaxy, they waged compliance actions, liberated human worlds, and forged the realm of Ultramar. By 899 M30, although they had not yet reached the overwhelming numerical superiority they would possess by the time of the Horus Heresy, they were already among the largest legions, with roughly 166,000 warriors in their ranks. The Ultramarines had spent decades expanding their numbers and strengthening the eastern frontier. Their supply and recruitment networks were excellent, and Guilliman's generalship had reached a formidable height. Yet he understood that a lingering doubt remained within the soul of his legion. It came from the Osiris Cluster Rebellion, a disastrous defeat suffered only a few years before his reunion with the 13th. Marius Gage's tenure as Legion Master had begun with that disaster, and its memory had settled heavily into the Legion's identity. Though rarely spoken of openly, it remained a wound. Guilliman knew that only one act could fully remove it. The Ultramarines would have to find the Xenos known as the Osirian Cybrids and destroy them utterly. From the moment he first reviewed the reports, Guilliman had prepared for that day. He studied battle logs, gun picture records, and deep auspex data from surviving warships, searching even microscopic fluctuations for useful insight. Across decades of campaigns, he continued to run theoretical battle scenarios against the Cybrids, certain that one day they would return. Rumors surfaced from time to time. Rogue traders carried frontier tales of massacres and disappearances, though none were conclusive. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and many Xenos species could have been responsible. Only at Maxilla Veritas, near the warp rift known as the Maelstrom, was evidence of Cybrid activity considered credible. By the time the Ultramarine cruisers arrived, however, the trail had gone cold. At last, near the end of 899 M30, Guilliman received confirmation. The Cybrids had not only reappeared, they had been met in battle. The report came through Terra's astrotelepathic network from a sub-fleet of the 12th Legion, still known then as the Warhounds, before their rediscovery of Angron. Under Praetor Irad Krug, the Warhounds had been fighting near Eurydice Terminal on the southwestern edge of the Great Crusade's frontier. There, the Warhounds had been defending a frontier outpost from Orc Void Raiders of the self-proclaimed Glorantine Empire. Though badly outnumbered, they held the Orcs at bay through brutal boarding actions in orbit and fierce assaults against their landing zones. During the largest Orc attack yet attempted, a mysterious third force struck both sides. When the Ultramarines' Retribution fleet arrived, even Guilliman could not have fully anticipated what awaited them. The system had become a wasteland of wreckage, fire, and radioactive echoes from heavy weapons fire. They found only a few hundred surviving Warhounds, the remnants of a force once 10 times larger, still led by the gravely wounded Irad Krug. Macragge explained what had happened. The Cybrids had used their mental powers to enslave a vast, feral population of orcs and turn them against their own kind. They had attempted to do the same to the Imperial defenders of Eurydice. Only the Warhounds had resisted their influence, and they had paid dearly for it. They would have been overwhelmed entirely had the wider forces of the Glordian Empire not entered the system in massive numbers. The battle spiraled into devastation. Orcs fought with unnatural fury, driven by alien masters to exterminate everything before them. More Cybrid hourglass void ships appeared, bringing enslaved Xenos warriors and vessels from species barely known to Imperial records. Eurydice Terminal had become a killing star, drawing armies into its destruction. Guilliman assessed the battlefield and adjusted his plans without hesitation. Though Macragge requested that his surviving legionaries be recovered and allowed to join the line, Guilliman refused. This battle would be for the Ultramarines alone. The plan was direct and brutal. Rather than engage in extended bombardment or close-range broadsides, Guilliman ordered a full boarding assault. He drove the core of his fleet, along with nearly 100,000 Ultramarines, directly into the heart of the enemy formation. Guilliman later recorded that he and his legion were often seen as opposed to the tactics that cost heavy Ultramarine lives. Eurydice showed the truth more clearly. Guilliman rejected waste, not sacrifice. When sacrifice became the most efficient path to victory, the Ultramarines would pay that price with absolute resolve. As the fleets closed, hundreds of gunships and assault rams launched from Ultramarine flight bays. Legion ships unleashed thousands of lance batteries and macro cannons. The Cybrid nomad vessels answered with frenzied lashes of elemental energy, tearing hulls apart and leaving void ships burning in the dark. Still, the Ultramarines advanced. Within the hourglass vessels, the boarding war became savage. The Ultramarines moved through maze-like corridors like the inner workings of some immense machine, destroying everything in their path. They encountered the Cybrids themselves, gaunt, half-solid vapor forms without their exo-armor, burning with psychokinetic power. They fought with desperate violence, striking with mind-searing blasts. But for every legionary who fell, more pushed forward. Invictori bearing axe and shield led the advance, supported by Terminator-armored veterans who moved like walking bulwarks. As they pressed deeper into the vessels, they planted melt-bombs and adamantic implosion charges throughout corridors and power junctions. The 13th Legion had awakened a rare and focused hunger for vengeance, and nothing could turn it aside. Guilliman himself breached the innermost chamber of the largest hourglass ship. There he found the master of the Cybrids, a towering, multi-limbed gestalt creature 3 times his height. Its long, almost equine head unleashed shockwaves strong enough to crack ceramite as the chamber was invaded. Guilliman's Terminator-armored honor guard staggered and fell beneath the psychic assault. Beside him stood Chief Battle Psyker Aeroth Ptolemy, who fought the creature on the psychic plane with all the strength he possessed. As Ptolemy shielded his Primarch from the full force of the Cyber King's power, Guilliman charged. The Xenos reared above them, clawed limbs bearing strange weapons like some devil god of old night. Guilliman struck with the strength and speed granted by the Emperor's genetic mastery, cleaving limb from vaporous limb. Ptolemy gave his life holding back the creature's psychic fury, and Guilliman delivered the final vengeance of the 13th Legion. He tore the glowing brain from the monster's skull, crushed it beneath his heel. Across the system, the towering vessels of the Osirian Cybrids began to fall. Some were destroyed from within by explosive charges. Others were ripped apart in the crossfire of waiting ultramarine formations as they tried to flee. None escaped. With the Cybrids dead, their enslaved Xenos armies collapsed as well. Only the battered Glortian orcs remained, already exhausted by the slaughter. The Ultramarines drove them back into the outer darkness. The victory came at a heavy cost. Several thousand Ultramarines were lost, many of them veterans from the Legion's Terran roots, who had been eager to stand at the forefront and erase the shame of the past. The price had been willingly paid for vengeance, and it was a price that Roboute Guilliman would pay again when duty demanded it. When Horus turned against the Imperium and gave himself to the ruinous powers, one of his first strategic aims was to draw as many loyalist legions away from Terra as possible before his rebellion was openly revealed. To this end, Horus ordered Roboute Guilliman to lead an expeditionary force to Calth in the Viridian system of Ultramar. The stated purpose was to prepare for a campaign in the Eastern Fringe, where Horus claimed a vast orc war was gathering. Guilliman expected the word-bearers to join the 13th Legion in this effort, but he did not know that the 17th Legion had already fallen to chaos decades earlier, or that Lorgar had eagerly accepted Horus's command to strike with the Ultramarines. The word-bearers launched their surprise attack without warning, devastating the Ultramarines' fleet and overwhelming their ground forces across Calth. The opening stages of the battle saw the 13th Legion driven back over huge stretches of territory. The word-bearers took savage satisfaction in this betrayal, for they had never forgotten Monarchia, the city destroyed on Kur when the Emperor publicly chastised them for violating the Imperial truth. Guilliman's flagship survived the first attack and began emergency repairs while regrouping with other surviving vessels. Once he understood the scale of the disaster, Guilliman sent an astropathic distress call to Macragge. On the surface, the Ultramarines had been forced into retreat, yet many of them were sons of Calth and refused to break. They dug into fortified positions, while Guilliman coordinated scattered defensive forces through clear and precise commands. Captain Ventanus led one of the critical counterattacks, breaking out and retaking Calth's defense laser silos. From the surface, those weapons helped relieve the Ultramarines' fleet in orbit. Guilliman's remaining forces held long enough for the wider 13th Legion to arrive and drive the word-bearers from the system, though victory came at a dreadful cost. Before their retreat, the word-bearers turned Calth's orbital defense platforms against the Viridian star, stripping away layers of its photosphere and destabilizing it. Calth's surface was rendered uninhabitable. Beneath the ruined world, Ultramarines and stranded wordbearers became locked in a brutal subterranean conflict, later known as the Underworld War. The battle also served a darker purpose. Through the slaughter at Calth, the Wordbearer summoned the Ruinstorm, a massive warp storm intended to isolate Ultramar from the wider galaxy and prevent the Ultramarines from reaching Terra. Guilliman and a large portion of his legion had remained off-world because of the nature of the Wordbearer's fleet ambush. Though battered, they were not destroyed. In the aftermath, Guilliman received the orders of Malcador the Sigillite and prepared to serve the Imperium's defense however he could. In the wake of Calth, Guilliman gathered every vessel he could spare. He drew ships from the surviving Ultramarines' fleet, reinforced them with elements of the First Relief Force bound for Calth, and used the 13th Legion's astropathic choirs to track Lorgar directly. Lorgar and the Wordbearers soon joined Angron and the World Eaters, launching the Shadow Crusade against the 500 worlds of Ultramar. Their goal was to spread the Ruinstorm across the eastern fringe, cutting the galaxy in two while Horus advanced on Terra. The Shadow Crusade devastated 26 worlds before Guilliman's Retribution fleet caught the traitors at Nucaria, Angron's homeworld. There, the World Eaters were in the process of exterminating the planet's population in vengeance for what had been done to Angron a century earlier. Guilliman's temporary flagship, Courage Above All, emerged from the warp at the edge of the system, leading 41 Ultramarines vessels. His fleet was wounded and improvised, assembled from scattered expeditionary forces. It was not a formal interdiction fleet, but a strike force aimed directly at the enemy's heart. The Ultramarines engaged the traitor fleets with calculated aggression. Their larger vessels traded broadsides with the enemy, while the smaller elements struck from safer range. Guilliman focused the Armada's strength on two objectives: destroy Lorgar's flagship, the Fidelitas Lex, and board the World Eater's flagship, the Conqueror. The battle was fought in orbit and on the surface. Ultramarines' vessels forced their way toward Nucaria, launching drop pods, gunships, and troop carriers despite suffering heavy losses. Lord Tara Saren, commander of the Conqueror, fought fiercely and destroyed several Ultramarine ships, but the 13th Legion eventually punched through and landed troops on the planet. The Fidelitas Lex was slowly reduced to ruin. Its shields failed, its armor cracked, and the cathedrals and fortresses along its spine were shattered by repeated Ultramarines' attacks. The ship fought on, even as evacuation craft poured from its hull. But Guilliman had resolved that Lorgar's flagship would be killed first through relentless, methodical punishment. At the same time, the battle barge Armsman intercepted the Conqueror and launched boarding craft. While the World Eaters repelled the assault, smaller Ultramarine ships slipped past and delivered more troops to the surface. The Ultramarines who landed on Nucaria were veterans of Calth. Their armor was scarred burned and cracked from the earlier battles, and they carried a cold, disciplined hatred for the word-bearers. They established footholds in defensible positions, clearing landing zones for reinforcements, even as the World Eaters crashed into them in frenzied packs. The 12th Legion fought with the savage abandon of warriors enslaved by the butcher's nails. The word-bearers advanced with hymns, sermons, and icons of bone and corrupted metal. The Ultramarines met both with controlled fury, driven by vengeance for Calth and the worlds of Ultramar. As the fighting raged, the burning remains of the Fidelidus Lex fell into Nucaria's atmosphere and plunged toward the ocean, its engines dragging the stern down first. Amid the chaos, Guilliman finally found Lorgar. The two Primarchs met without speeches or spectacle, their first clash sending energy flaring from Power Fist and Crozius. Around them, their sons killed one another, but neither Primarch looked away. Guilliman confronted Lorgar for the devastation unleashed across Ultramar. In anger, he struck his brother hard enough to batter his sternum. Lorgar answered with a weak burst of telekinesis, and then brought his Crozius into the side of Guilliman's head with tremendous force. Both Primarchs stood wounded beneath the gray sky. Their duel was interrupted when Angron burst through the Ultramarine lines. His armor was ruined, his chain blades slick with gore, and across his chest hung the skulls of his dead gladiator kin from Deshelica Ridge. He threw himself at Guilliman with murderous rage. Guilliman fought Angron in a brutal exchange, but the Red Angel drove him back. During the duel, Guilliman's blow shattered one of the skulls hanging from Angron's breastplate, and his boot crushed the fragments into dust. Angron's anguish erupted into a howl, and Lorgar seized the moment. The word-bearer's Primarch began chanting in a language never spoken by any living being. His ritual summoned the Ruinstorm to Nucaria and tore the sky open. Blood rained from above, formed from the ghosts of 100 murdered worlds. Lorgar's intent was to save Angron from the butcher's nails by transforming him into something far worse. Guilliman was badly wounded. Angron drove a chainsword beneath his breastplate, and Guilliman staggered back, bleeding heavily. His warriors fought desperately to reach him. Their chance came when Lorgar's ritual locked Angron in place and began his transformation into a demon prince of Khorne. The Ultramarines recovered their Primarch and withdrew in disciplined formation, firing even as they retreated. Guilliman escaped Nucaria, shaken by what his brothers had become. The World Eaters completed their purge of the planet, leaving no human life behind. Angron, reborn in service to the Blood God, left his hated homeworld and never looked back. The Ruinstorm left Guilliman cut off from Terra and much of the galaxy. With no reliable knowledge of whether the Emperor still lived, he feared that the dream of human unity might already be lost. In response, he created Imperium Secundus as a contingency, a second human empire meant to preserve the ideals of the Great Crusade if Terra had fallen. Guilliman would later regard this as one of his greatest mistakes. Many Loyalist forces trapped behind the Ruinstorm found their way to Macragge through the Pharaohs, an ancient Xenos device located on Sotha. It functioned as a beacon through the warp, much like the Astronomicon, which had been obscured. Guilliman refused to declare himself emperor, fearing any resemblance to Horus's ambition. He first considered Lionel Johnson, who had arrived with the Dark Angels, though he remained wary of the Lion's motives. After the Blood Angels arrived, following the horrors of Cygnus, Guilliman named Sanguinius as regent of Imperium Secundus, ensuring that none would claim the title of emperor. The fragile order of Imperium Secundus was troubled from the start. Guilliman survived an Alpha Legion assassination attempt carried out by operatives disguised as Ultramarines. Later, Conrad Kurz, who had hidden aboard the Dark Angel's flagship Invincible Reason, was unleashed upon Macragge. Guilliman and the Lion fought Kurz together, but the Night Haunter lured them into a trap and brought a structure down upon them with explosives. They survived only because Barbarous Dantioch, a loyalist Iron Warrior, activated the Pharaohs and teleported them to Sotha. Tensions between Guilliman and L. Johnson worsened as Kurz continued to haunt Macragge. The Lions believed Kurz was behind rebellions spreading across the planet and demanded martial law. Guilliman resisted. After a suicide bombing struck an Astartes convoy, the Dark Angels imposed martial law without Guilliman's permission. This dispute intensified during the Illyrium Rebellion. L. Johnson wanted to unleash weapons of mass destruction to flush Kurz out, but Guilliman objected to the likely loss of innocent lives. The Lion instead launched a more conventional assault, and Kurz was finally captured. At Guilliman's insistence, Kurz was given a public trial. During it, the Night Haunter revealed that L. Johnson had secretly ordered orbital strikes against Illyrium in direct violation of Guilliman's wishes. Guilliman and Sanguinius, angered by the Lion's actions, ordered him and the Dark Angels to leave Imperium Secundus. The Lion later repented and asked instead to serve as Kurz's jailer. After Kurz's trial, Guilliman, Sanguinius, and L. Johnson agreed that Imperium Secundus had been a mistake. They chose to dissolve it and attempt to breach the Ruinstorm, having learned that the Emperor still lived and that Terra would need them soon. As their combined fleets moved through the storm, they encountered horrors of the warp and heard reports of an entity known as the Pilgrim, which was spreading destruction across the galaxy. At Anuari, Guilliman's fleet was ambushed by traitor forces, and Guilliman survived another assassination attempt by word-bearers wielding chaos blades known as Athames. Believing the weapons might help him understand chaos and turn that knowledge against the traitors, Guilliman kept the blades within his flagship's vault. This was an early example of the dangerous logic later condemned by the Inquisition as radicalism. During the Battle of Piran, Sanguinius received a vision. He understood that the fleet had to travel to Davin, the world where Horus's fall had truly begun. Guilliman and the Lion doubted the vision, but agreed to follow it. Both assumed they would destroy the planet on arrival. Once they reached Davin, Sanguinius shocked L. Johnson by taking Conrad Kurz from the Invincible Reason. hoping the Night Haunter's precognition would help him understand what awaited him. Sanguinius ordered a mass landing, and the furious lion nearly commanded exterminatus, despite his brother's presence below. L. Johnson stopped himself and told Guilliman he believed the warp was manipulating them, drawing them toward the same damnation that had claimed Horus and the traitor Primarchs. Guilliman accepted the warning and realized that the captured Athames were the source of corruption within their ranks. He returned to his vault and crushed the blades with his power fist, rejecting the temptation of the dark gods. On Davin, Sanguinius was trapped within a warp portal and fought the demon Madeo. Guilliman and L. Johnson struggled to reach him as battle erupted on the planet and in orbit. Guilliman's acting flagship, Samothrace, was destroyed by the demon ship Veritas Ferrum. At the temple of the Serpent Lodge, where Horus had first been corrupted, Guilliman and L. Johnson finally set aside their bitterness and fought together. Side by side, they defeated a massive demon engine known as a Soul Grinder. Sanguinius eventually escaped the warp, and the Loyalist forces withdrew to orbit. Davin was destroyed by cyclonic torpedoes, and with its physical anchor gone, the demonic fleet vanished back into the realm of chaos. In the space where Davin had been, a breach in the Ruinstorm appeared. It led toward Terra, but Horus had foreseen the opening and left a massive traitor fleet to guard it. Guilliman and L. Johnson agreed that the Ultramarines and Dark Angels would hold the enemy while Sanguinius and the Blood Angels slipped through the breach. As Sanguinius had foreseen that if the Blood Angels failed to reach Terra, the traitors would win. The plan succeeded, and in the months that followed, the Ruinstorm began to weaken, and Guilliman gathered what Ultramarine forces he could before beginning his own advance toward Terra. His path was blocked by a vast Iron Warrior's defensive chain spread across hundreds of worlds. The campaign that followed was bitter and costly. Both sides suffered heavily, but the Ultramarines pushed forward, slowly breaking through the barrier. At last, Guilliman cleared the final Iron Warrior's garrisons and set course for Terra at maximum speed. His legion was only hours away when the final battle of the Siege of Terra began aboard Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. Because of the Ruinstorm, the Battle of Calth, the Shadow Crusade, the Second Battle of Davin, and the long campaign against the Iron Warriors, Guilliman could do little to aid the Emperor during the Siege of Terra. In 14 M31, Horus launched his great assault on the Throne World, believing many Loyalist legions were still delayed across the galaxy. The traitors came close to breaking the Imperial Palace, but the defenders held long enough for Loyalist reinforcements to emerge at the edge of the Sol system. News reached Horus in orbit. The Ultramarines, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves were only hours away. His gamble failed. If the battle had become a war of attrition, he could not win it. What happens next remains debated. Some Imperial scholars believe Horus lowered the shields of the Vengeful Spirit in a final moment of regret, allowing the Emperor to judge him personally. Others believe it was a challenge, a way to force a direct confrontation before the palace could be fully taken. Whatever the reason, Horus lowered the void shields of his Gloriana-class battleship. The Emperor, his custodians, Sanguinius, and a company of Imperial fists teleported aboard. Horus was slain, ending the heresy, but Sanguinius was killed, and the Emperor was mortally wounded, and soon interred upon the Golden Throne by Rogel Dorn. Guilliman's reinforcement fleet, numbering more than 3,200 capital ships, was nearly within reach when the Emperor faced Horus. Yet, without the Astronomicon burning clearly, his fleet was stranded just short of Terra. At sublight speed, the final distance would have taken tens of thousands of years. The situation changed when Euphrates Keeler and the faithful of the Lectitio Divinitatis restored the Astronomicon through the psychic force of their collective faith. With the beacon active again, Guilliman reached Terra and helped drive back the remaining traitor forces after Horus's defeat. When the Ultramarines arrived, they found Terra, the Sol system, and much of the Imperium's heartland in ruins. Guilliman refused to allow the Imperium to collapse. He began dispatching his legion across the galaxy to contain invasion, rebellion, and disorder, while the surviving Loyalist forces recovered and prepared for the Great Scouring. The Horus heresy left the Imperium shattered. Tens of thousands of Loyalist Space Marines had died in savage campaigns across the galaxy, and half of the original 18 legions had sided with Horus, fallen to chaos. By the war's end, the Imperium possessed far fewer Astartes than before, the very moment when it needed them most. The Emperor's internment upon the Golden Throne left the Imperium without his direct rule. Confusion and disorder spread in the aftermath, and mankind's enemies prepared to strike. Many worlds remained under the grip of chaos, while rebellion and invasion threatened to pull the wounded Imperium apart. Into this crisis came Roboute Guilliman and the Ultramarines. Since the middle years of the Great Crusade, after the losses suffered by the Dark Angels during the Rangdan Xenocides, the Ultramarines had been the largest of the Astartes legions. Now, they were divided and sent across the struggling Imperium, fighting to contain invasion, unrest, and collapse wherever they appeared. Guilliman took control of the Council of Terra and established the office of Lord Commander of the Imperium. He assumed the authority once held by Malcador the Sigillite as Imperial Regent, guiding humanity through more than a Terran century of recovery after the Emperor's internment. This was the age of the Great Scouring, when the Imperium reclaimed worlds taken by the traitors, purged the remnants of Chaos rule, and restored Imperial authority across the galaxy. As stability slowly re-emerged, Guilliman turned his attention to reform. He wished to ensure that no single military commander could ever again control a force as vast as the legions Horus had commanded. To achieve this, he broke the Loyalist legions into smaller chapters of roughly 1,000 Space Marines, drawing upon an older legion formation of the same name. The 9 Loyalist first founding legions were divided into the second founding chapters, and the legions Astartes became the Adeptus Astartes. No one, regardless of noble intent, would ever again wield the full power of a Space Marine legion. At the same time, Guilliman completed the great military work that would define the future of the Space Marines, the Codex Astartes. This masterwork set out the proper structure, conduct, and battlefield doctrine of the chapters. Its teachings reshaped the Adeptus Astartes and became one of the foundations of the Imperium's military survival. The second founding was decreed 7 Terran years after Horus's death. Most Loyalist legions were divided into fewer than 5 successor chapters, but the Ultramarines were split far more widely. The exact number of Ultramarine successors created during the second founding remains uncertain. The oldest surviving copy of the Codex Astartes gives the total as 23, though it does not name them. With the second founding, the Ultramarines themselves were greatly reduced in size. Most of their warriors left Macragge to establish new chapters on homeworlds granted elsewhere. The Fortress of Hera, built to house far more Space Marines than now remained, was partly stripped of its arsenals and weapons shops, so the new successor chapters could found their own strongholds. The Ultramarines' gene banks and vast recruitment systems were reduced as well. From this division, the gene seed of the Ultramarines became preeminent throughout the Imperium. The chapters created from their line during the second founding became known as the Primogenitors, the Firstborn. Guilliman's legacy to the Adeptus Astartes was genetic, martial, and spiritual. 10,000 years later, the Primogenitor chapters still venerate Roboute Guilliman as their founding father and patron. They look to the ruler of Ultramar and master of the Ultramarines as an exemplar of what a Space Marine should be. In this way, the Ultramarines rose to a position of lasting preeminence among their brother chapters. Roboute Guilliman continued to serve beside the Ultramarines for a century after the second founding, leading both his chapter and the Imperium as Lord Commander and Imperial Regent. During these years, it is said he fought several incursions alongside his surviving Loyalist brothers, striking against Chaos Space Marines and the pocket empires they still controlled within Imperial space. One such conflict, on the world of Escrador, Guilliman faced the Alpha Legion and its Primarch, Alfarius. Exploiting Alfarius' vanity, Guilliman launched a surprise attack against the hearts of the Alpha Legion forces and killed a Space Marine he believed to be Alfarius in single combat. The Ultramarines believed the Alpha Legion would die without its head, but this proved a grave mistake. Its symbol was the Hydra, and the Legion remained coherent even after the apparent death of its Primarch. The Alpha Legion drove the Ultramarines back through repeated assaults, and Guilliman was eventually forced to withdraw his warriors into orbit and bombard Escrador from above. The Alpha Legion survived, remaining a subtle and persistent threat to the Imperium for millennia. At some point during this era, Guilliman formed a relationship with Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call, a tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus, who did not fear innovation in the way many of his peers did. Call had once worked beside the Emperor in the gene labs of Terra's biotechnical division. Guilliman entrusted him with 2 immense tasks: to develop a technological means of restoring him from death should he fall, and to create a new generation of transhuman warriors, the Primaris Space Marines, who would improve upon the Emperor's original design and learn from the failures revealed by the Horus Heresy. Call would labor over these charges for the next 10,000 years. Guilliman's apparent end came at the Battle of Thelsala in 121 M31. There, he faced Fulgrim, the demon Primarch of the Emperor's children, who had ascended as a demon prince of Slaanesh. Fulgrim struck Guilliman in the neck with a poisoned blade, a weapon notably similar to the anatheme used by Erebus to wound Horus on Davin's moon. Mortally wounded, Guilliman was carried back to Macragge and placed within a stasis field. There he remained for the next 10,000 years, frozen outside the normal flow of time. Though change should have been impossible within stasis, many pilgrims of the Imperial cult believed his wounds were slowly healing. They claimed that one day he would awaken when the Imperium needed him most. The Shrine of Guilliman was built to contain his body and became one of the holiest places in the Imperium. It stood within the Temple of Correction, a vast sepulchre forming part of the Ultramarines' northern polar fortress on Macragge. The temple was a marvel of construction, reflecting the Ultramarines' devotion to precision and order. Its scale and grandeur challenged the human mind. The multicolored glass dome above it was the largest of its kind in the human-settled galaxy. Even the techno-magi of the Adeptus Mechanicus came to admire the structure, which was said to have been designed by Guilliman himself. According to the Ultramarines, the temple contained enough marble to build a mountain and enough adamantium and plasteel to construct a sizable Imperial war fleet. At its heart stood the great marble throne of Roboute Guilliman. Upon it sat the preserved body of the Primarch. 10,000 years had passed since Thelsala, yet Guilliman's form remained untouched by decay. The wound left by Fulgrim's toxic blade was still visible at his throat. The stasis field preserved him by removing him from normal time, preventing any change or corruption. And for those 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind remained immobile upon the golden throne. His body was reduced to a withered husk, yet his Imperium endured. It did not prosper. It survived beneath the weight of misery, persecution, suspicion, and endless war. Heretics, witches, Xenos, and traitors assailed it from every side, and only the sacrifice of countless citizens kept it alive. In the 41st millennium, the Imperium faced one of its greatest trials. Orcs ravaged the stars. The Tau Empire expanded in the eastern fringe. Tyranid high fleets descended from beyond the galaxy to consume all before them. Necron dynasties stirred from ancient sleep, and above all these threats, the forces of chaos launched their most devastating invasion in ages. Abaddon the Despoiler, Lord of the Black Legion, unleashed the 13th Black Crusade. Countless worlds fell, heresy spread, madness grew, and violent warp storms tore great wounds through the galaxy. The High Lords of Terra, blind in their desperation, sent billions to die in attempts to preserve the failing Imperium. The Eldari understood that the Imperium needed more than armies. It needed a symbol, a hero, and a living embodiment of the Emperor's will. It needed a Primarch. The full force of the 13th Black Crusade fell upon Cadia, the fortress world guarding the Cadian Gate, the only reliably stable route from the Eye of Terror. Despite being severely outnumbered and attacked from all sides, the defenders held with extraordinary courage under Lord Castellan Ursarkar Creed. As the battle grew desperate, many of the Imperium's champions gathered on Cadia. Space Marines from several chapters joined the defense, including the Black Templars under Marshal Marius Almeric, and the Imperial Fists under Captain Tor Garadon, who brought the mighty star-fort Phalanx into war. Saint Celestine descended into Cadia's darkest hour, strengthening the defenders with miracles granted by the Emperor. Inquisitor Katarina Greyfax, long held captive in the collection of Trazyn the Infinite, was released by the Necron Lord to once again serve the Imperial cause. The key to a possible Imperial victory was discovered by Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call, guided by the Harlequin Shadowseer Salandri Veilwalker. Call unlocked secrets of the Necron Black Pylons that stood across Cadia and other worlds of the system. Abaddon had long sought to destroy these structures, weakening the barrier between reality and the warp. Call saw a chance to reverse that damage, and perhaps close the Eye of Terror itself. It was not to be. Though the defenders fought with courage, the pylons were destroyed, and Cadia received its final death blow. The surviving Imperial forces were forced to flee as chaos overran the doomed world. Behind them, the Eye of Terror began to expand across the galaxy, opening into a vast new warp rift. But one hope remained: Call's ancient pact with Roboute Guilliman, and the mysterious artifact he carried within an armored auto-reliquary. The survivors of Cadia declared themselves the Celestian Crusade, named in honor of Saint Celestine, and set course for Macragge in Ultramar. Abaddon's forces followed close behind. At that same time, the Eldari underwent a profound upheaval. Yenid, the Eldari god of the dead, partially awoke in the Aether and chose Rivain, a former Eldari of Craftworld Biltan, as his prophet. Ivrain had walked many paths in her life, from dancer to warlock to aspect warrior. She later became a Corsair leader before being driven into the Webway and eventually to Comarog, the dark city of the Drakari. Fighting as a gladiatrix in the Crucible arena, she was slain by a priestess of Morai Heg, only to be resurrected by the power of Yenid while suspended between life and death. Her rebirth during the Night of Revelations caused a great disjunction within Comarog, unleashing the demonic servants of Slaanesh upon the Dark City. With the aid of the Visarch and followers drawn from the Drakari, Ivrain escaped and brought word of Yenid's awakening to Craftworld Biltan. During the Battle of Biltan, the Craftworld underwent a violent cycle of death and rebirth, giving rise to the Incarnate, the avatar of Yenid. Some Ossarnyani embraced Ivrain's message and became the Inari, the Reborn. Others rejected the new god as dangerous arrogance. Ivrain continued regardless, seeking the lost Crone's world and pursuing a desperate plan to turn back the rising power of chaos. That mission brought her to the frozen moon of Classius, orbiting the fortress world of Kasser Holn in the Cadian system. There, Ivrain led an army drawn from many Eldari kindreds through a webway gate and emerged in time to save the Celestian Crusade from Black Legion pursuers. The Yenari and Celestians made common cause, and together they began the journey through the webway toward Ultramar, carrying with them a fragile hope. In the closing years of the 41st millennium, Ultramar came under sustained attack from many enemies. High Fleet Leviathan moved through the void toward Guilliman's ancient realm. The arch-arsonist of Caradon led a vast orc wall against the Ultramarines' eastern defenses. Yet the greatest danger came from chaos. A massive horde of traitors, renegades, mutants, and madmen invaded Ultramar under the demon prince Macragge the Reborn. War spread across dozens of worlds, from Espendor to Turantis to oceanic Talisar. After months of sorrow and bloodshed, the Ultramarines prevailed. Macragge was defeated, and his armies were driven beyond the borders of Ultramar. Marneus Calgar then led a brief period of rebuilding and consolidation, strengthening the battered defenses of the realm. That brief recovery ended in the aftermath of Cadia's fall. Abaddon learned from the Chaos Sorcerer Zarafistin that Belisarius Cawl had escaped Cadia with a device capable of shifting the long war into the Imperium's favor. He also learned that Cawl and the Celestian Crusade had entered the webway with the aid of the Inari and were heading for Macragge. To prevent this threat from reaching its goal, Abaddon detached part of his Black Fleet and ordered an invasion of Ultramar. Warriors from the Black Legion, Iron Warriors, Night Lords, and other traitor factions attacked the realm. Some struck the outer systems to delay reinforcements, while the main host rode the warp directly into the Macragge system. Thus began the Ultramar campaign of the 13th Black Crusade. The Celestian Crusade was led by Saint Celestine, Belisarius Cawl, Marshal Marius Almoric, and Inquisitor Greyfax. Alongside them came Yvain and the Visarch. They emerged from the webway onto the shrine world of Laphis in the Macragge system, and immediately found themselves in a war zone. After defeating nearby Chaos forces and aiding the local Ultramarines against Helldrakes besieging their fortress, the Celestians convinced the skeptical Space Marines to grant them passage to Macragge. Yvain and the Visarch sent most of the Inari back into the webway to pursue missions vital to their own people. When the Celestians reached Macragge aboard an Ultramarine strike cruiser, they found the capital world under full-scale invasion. In orbit, Chaos and Loyalist fleets clashed. On the ground, the fortress of Hera itself was in danger of falling. Cawl gained an audience with Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines and Lord of Macragge. He revealed that he was more than 10,000 years old and had known Roboute Guilliman during the Horus Heresy. Cawl explained that Guilliman had tasked him with finding a way to restore him to life even before Fulgrim mortally wounded him at Thelsala. Within Cawl's auto-reliquary were the Armor of Fate, a unique suit of artificer armor designed to sustain Guilliman's life functions, and the Emperor's Sword, a weapon containing a fragment of the Emperor's own psychic essence. Calgar and his chapter council were wary, especially because the Celestians had allied with Xenos. Chief Librarian Tigurius supported their claim, explaining that he had seen prophetic dreams and believed their arrival was no accident. Faced with the Chaos assault and the possibility of salvation, Calgar allowed the Celestians and the Nari into the Temple of Correction, where Guilliman sat in stasis. As Cawl began his work upon the Primarch's time-frozen body, the Black Legion launched a massive assault on the temple. The Celestians, Ultramarine officers, and the Third Brotherhood of Grey Knights under Grand Master Aldrich Voltus fought to protect the ritual. More than 100 Black Legionaries attacked, and Dreadclaw assault boats brought still more Chaos forces into the shrine. The defenders were nearly overwhelmed. At the final moment, Ivrain called upon a need. The power of the Eldari god of the dead joined with Call's arcane technology, healing Guilliman's ancient wound and awakening him from 10,000 years of stasis. The reborn Primarch rose in fury. Guilliman tore through the Chaos attackers and sent a surge of hope through the Ultramarines and the other Loyalist defenders. The Black Legion assault collapsed, and the battle for the fortress of Hera turned in an instant. With Guilliman's resurrection, the fate of Macragge and all of Ultramar was decided. After the battle, Guilliman was restored as Primarch of the Ultramarines and all their successor chapters, Lord of Macragge and rightful ruler of Ultramar. Marneus Calgar willingly ceded chapter leadership to his gene-father. Guilliman then revoked the political autonomy of the worlds that had once belonged to Ultramar and drifted apart over the millennia. The 500 worlds would be restored along with their ruler. With Guilliman in command, the Loyalist forces on Macragge became a weapon of extraordinary precision. Within roughly 7 months, chaos was driven from Macragge, and then from most of Ultramar. Ivrain, the Visarch, and the remaining Ynnari departed with Guilliman's wary blessing and his thanks. In the aftermath, Guilliman struggled with the reality of the Imperium he had returned to. The dream of prosperity, reason, scientific wonder, and human unity promised during the Great Crusade had decayed into tyranny, ignorance, fear, and suspicion. At first, the truth nearly broke his spirit. Yet Guilliman found hope again. He resolved to travel from Macragge through the dangerous tides of the warp to Terra, where he would consult with the Emperor and determine what could still be done to save mankind from the servants of the Dark Gods. So began the Terran Crusade. As the warp grew increasingly turbulent in the aftermath of the 13th Black Crusade, Roboute Guilliman gathered every Imperial force that could reach Macragge. From these scattered armies and fleets, he assembled a vast armada bound for Terra. Guilliman left Macragge and Ultramar in the hands of Marneus Calgar, who was restored to overall command of the Ultramarines chapter. The Crusade fleet then set out for the Throne World, but while passing near the great warp rift known as the Maelstrom, it was intercepted by a Chaos fleet led by Magnus the Red and the Thousand Sons. Magnus had recently stirred from the planet of sorcerers for the first time in millennia, first to assault the Fenris system of his ancient enemies, the Space Wolves, and now to confront Guilliman. Through a powerful sorcerer's ritual, Magnus hurled the Terran Crusade into the Maelstrom, trapping it within the labyrinth of that wound in reality. Time within the warp could not be measured reliably, and the Crusade wandered from demon world to demon world, suffering steady losses under constant demonic assault. Guilliman's frustration and guilt deepened as the fleet struggled to find any way free. Hope came through a psychic message from the Ossarniani Farseer Eldrad Uthran, now allied with the Ynnari. Eldrad provided a sequence of landmarks the Imperial fleet could follow to escape the warp rift. Yet when the diminished Crusade reached the starship graveyard, marking the route back to real space, it was met by another Chaos fleet, this one composed of the Red Corsairs, and led by the Lord of Change, Kairos Fate Weaver. The Chaos Forces attacked every vessel in the Imperial fleet. Kairos ultimately defeated Guilliman by binding him in chains formed from the Primarch's own guilt. With Guilliman immobilized and his life threatened, the rest of the Imperial fleet was forced to surrender. The captured crusade was taken to a Blackstone fortress hidden within the Maelstrom, a secret gift from Abaddon the Despoiler to the Red Corsairs. There, Guilliman and his surviving followers might have remained imprisoned forever had aid not come from an unexpected source. The Harlequins, led by the Shadow Seer Salandri Veilwalker, intervened alongside Cypher, the mysterious fallen angel, whose loyalties had long remained uncertain. Cypher freed Guilliman and his companions in return for a promise that he would be brought before the Golden Throne. Their ships had been lost, their crews sacrificed to the ruinous powers, but Veilwalker offered another path to Terra through the Webway Gate at the heart of the Blackstone Fortress. The Imperials fought their way deep into the alien Star Fortress, battling demons of Khorne and Tzeentch that flooded its interior. The final obstacle was Skarbrand, the Exiled One, the bloodthirster who slew the Emperor's champion, Marius Almeric, before attacking Guilliman directly. Guilliman defeated the Greater Demon in personal combat, aided by the wound Almeric's black sword had already carved into Skarbrand's burning flesh. With Skarbrand defeated, the survivors of the Terran Crusade entered the Webway and continued toward Terra. There, they discovered that Magnus and the Thousand Sons were already haunting the labyrinth dimension. Veilwalker explained that a secret Webway exit had long existed on Luna, and Guilliman realized Magnus had been waiting for them. If the exit opened into the Sol system, the Thousand Sons would follow through and unleash a chaos invasion at Terra's doorstep. With aid from the Harlequins, the Sisters of Silence, the Imperial Fists, and other Imperial forces, Guilliman and the Crusade survivors overwhelmed the Thousand Sons. Magnus was cast back through the portal, and the Webway Gate was permanently sealed so it could never again threaten the throne world. At last, Guilliman had reached Terra. The awed defenders escorted him to the Imperial Palace, where the survivors of the Celestian and Terran Crusades parted ways. There, for the first time in 10,000 years, Guilliman stood before the Golden Throne and communed with the Emperor of Mankind for one full solar day. What passed between them is unknown. Guilliman emerged deeply disturbed by what he had sensed of his father's mind. To him, the Emperor seemed to have lost much of the humanity he had once displayed. He greeted Guilliman with interest, but as a creator might regard a long-lost instrument, rather than a father welcoming a beloved son. When Guilliman left the inner palace, he declared that he would once again take up the mantles of Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial Regent. As first among equals among the High Lords of Terra, he promised the people of the galaxy that he would gather the greatest armies and fleets seen since the Great Crusade, carry the war back to chaos, and revive what remained of the Emperor's lost dream for mankind. The era Indomitus had begun. For 10,000 years, Belisarius Cawl had labored over a charge given to him by Guilliman before the Primarch's mortal wounding by Fulgrim. His task was to create a new generation of transhuman warriors. After the Terran Crusade, with the Imperium on the edge of annihilation, that work was finally complete. The Primaris Space Marines were developed by Call on Mars across 10 millennia. Using the genetic template of the Emperor's original Space Marines as his foundation, Call created warriors larger, stronger, and faster than their firstborn predecessors. They were intended as the next evolution of the Emperor's Angels of Death, arriving at the darkest hour in Imperial history. These new warriors were equipped with weapons and armor forged on Mars, including Mark X Tacticus power armor, the Mark II Call pattern bolt rifle, and the new Redemptor dreadnoughts. Their arrival gave the Imperium desperately needed strength after the 13th Black Crusade and the birth of the Great Rift, which had divided the Imperium into two. At the dawn of the Indomitus Crusade, Guilliman brought the Primaris Marines into war. Some he organized into entirely new Space Marine chapters. Others he offered to existing chapters as reinforcements. Many chapter masters welcomed the Primaris into their ranks, while others viewed them with suspicion, believing the Emperor's work should not have been altered by mortal hands. Questions also lingered around their gene seed. The Primaris Marines still bore the genetic legacy of their Primarchs, and some wondered how these new warriors would respond to the inherited flaws of chapters such as the Blood Angels and Space Wolves. Before the crusade could begin in full, Guilliman was forced to defend Terra itself during the Battle of Lion's Gate, as the first warp storms of the Noctis Aeterna broke over Holy Terra. The Astronomicon was cut off, and the skies turned crimson. Khorne, eager to prove his supremacy over the other Chaos Gods, sent 88 cohorts of his demonic blood legions against the Imperial Palace. The Blood God sought the glory of tearing down the Golden Throne himself, and the Red Host materialized before the Lion's Gate of the Outer Palace. The defenses of the Imperial Palace were unmatched, but even they could not halt the demonic tide alone. Guilliman personally led Primaris Space Marines, Adeptus Custodes, and Sisters of Silence into battle. The assault was broken before it could reach the Eternity Gate, yet the High Lords of Terra were shaken by the realization that demons had manifested openly upon Holy Terra. Khorne's rage at the failure was so immense that his fortress in the realm of chaos trembled. The 8 bloodthirsters who had led the attack were not merely banished, their essences were annihilated by the heat of their god's fury. After Terra's defense, Guilliman assembled the Indomitus Crusade, the largest Imperial military force gathered since the original Great Crusade. Fleet Primus set out with elements of the Adeptus Custodes, a small force of the Sisters of Silence, vast numbers of Primaris Space Marines, and the 9 legions of the Unnumbered Suns. Strike forces from more than a dozen established Space Marine chapters, led by the Imperial Fists, also joined the Armada. Across the galaxy, Guilliman came to the aid of besieged worlds, broke enemy assaults, and drove back Chaos and Xenos invaders. Among the worlds reached by the Crusade was Baal, homeworld of the Blood Angels, which had been devastated by High Fleet Leviathan. By the time Guilliman's fleet arrived, warp storms had already consumed much of the High Fleet, and the Crusade helped the Blood Angels cleanse the remaining infestation and begin rebuilding. Recognizing the strength still needed from the Blood Angels and their successors, Guilliman named Commander Dante Lord Regent of the Imperium Nihilus. Dante was charged with reclaiming the worlds of the Dark Imperium, the half of mankind's realm where the Astronomicon no longer shone after the Noctis Aeterna. Word of Guilliman's return spread wherever astropathic communication still functioned. A hero of imperial myth had returned, and one of the demigods of the Great Crusade once more fought for mankind. The first phase of the Indomitus Crusade ended 12 standard years later at the Battle of Raukos. At the triumph of Raukos, Guilliman declared that the Imperium Sanctus, the half of the Imperium where the Astronomicon's light had been restored, was stabilized from imminent collapse. He then turned his attention back to Ultramar, where the Death Guard and the servants of Nurgle had begun a new war. After the Great Rift tore the Imperium in half, Ultramar came under attack from the servants of Nurgle. The Plague God sought to add Guilliman's realm to his garden in the realm of chaos. 3 star systems north of Ultramar, later known as the Scourge Stars, were corrupted by Nurgle's influence. Their worlds became staging grounds for invasion. Ultramar was attacked from within and without by the Death Guard, led by Mortarion, and by the demonic plague legions of Kugath, a great unclean one. The Plague Wars lasted several years. After the Battle of Raukos ended the first great phase of the Indomitus Crusade, Guilliman finally returned with reinforcements to aid his embattled home realm. Mortarion's invasion force was vast, strengthened by mutants, Nurglite cultists from the Scourge Stars, Typhus and his plague fleet, and Kugoth with 7 greater demons of Nurgle, known as the Plague Guard. Their strategy focused on seizing major worlds such as Iax, Espendor, and Connor, while smaller raids struck lesser worlds and withdrew before Ultramarine forces could respond. The Espendor system was the first to fall under siege. Every world in the system, except Espendor itself, was taken by chaos, while the Ultramarines fought bitterly to hold Espendor Prime. The greater demon Quaramos led this assault, and his partial conquest prepared the way for the wider Nurglite invasion fleet to enter Ultramar. Iax was overrun by demons under Kugoth. Earlier in the war, it had been converted into a hospital world to treat the spread of Nurgle's diseases across the subsector. Despite strict quarantine, this made it vulnerable to infiltration by Nurgle's heralds. Iax became the base for the Nurglite conquest. Mortarion, the Death Guard, and the Plague Guard later concentrated their strength there. Macragge suffered chaos-driven unrest, while Mortarion led probing attacks against the Ultramarines' homeworld. Though these attacks caused no widespread destruction to critical infrastructure, they damaged civilian morale and forced Marnius Calgar to spend time and resources on peacekeeping and public displays of strength. Typhus and his plague fleet captured one of the Ultramar star forts before Mortarion ordered him to strike the Ultramarines' training world of Parmenio. Connor, a Vital Forge world, also came under attack. The Death Guard sought to conquer it and used the system as a springboard for a final assault on Macragge. At the same time, opportunistic orcs descended upon the world, hoping to loot its scrap metal and fuel reserves. Their smoke-belching war machines rampaged across the battlefield, killing Imperial and Chaos forces alike. After days of heavy fighting, the Imperium regained control of Connor. Though the cost was high, much of its production capacity survived. Within hours, its manufactoria were sanctified and reactivated to support the war effort. When Guilliman returned to Ultramar, he first cleansed the hive world of Ardium in the Macragge system. There, he learned that Mortarion was using the Hand of Darkness to create plague engines, arcane machines capable of raising the dead as plague zombies and poxwalkers. Guilliman destroyed the plague engine on Ardium and freed the world from Nurgle's influence. He then returned to Macragge with Primaris reinforcements, bringing relief to the exhausted defenders and civilian population. Upon arriving, Guilliman declared that he had made a grave mistake after the Horus Heresy, when he allowed Ultramar's borders to shrink so drastically. He had believed Space Marines should not rule large regions of humanity, but now he chose to restore the old realm. Guilliman re-established the Tetrarch Council of Ultramar and appointed 4 new Tetrarchs, including his Primaris Equerry, Captain Decimus Felix, and Ultramarines' first captain, Severus Agamon. Their charge was to begin expanding Ultramar until it once again encompassed all the systems of the ancient 500 worlds. After assessing the war, Guilliman reorganized the Ultramarines, their mortal auxilia, and the successor chapters that had answered his call. Their fleets engaged the Death Guard and worked to secure Ultramar's shipping lanes, supply routes. Guilliman then launched the Spear of Espandor campaign, targeting the Espandor system because it served as the main supply route for the Death Guard invasion from the Scourge Stars. He retook each lost world and destroyed the plague engines raising the dead across the system. At Espandor, the Ultramarines fought beside their Primaris brethren for the first time. The forces of Nurgle were routed, and Guilliman ended the campaign by slaying Quaramas with the Emperor's sword and destroying the final plague engine in the system. Espandor was cleansed, and the Nurglite invaders were cut off from their base in the Scourge Stars. With their supply lines severed, their plague engines destroyed, and Imperial reinforcements arriving daily, Mortarion found himself trapped in a war of attrition. Guilliman had cut the Death Guard away from resupply, now intended to destroy them system by system. Mortarion chose to concentrate his remaining strength against a single target. Macragge remained too heavily defended, so he turned his forces toward Parmenio. The battle there became the largest armored clash of the Plague Wars. The Starfort Galatan attempted to support Loyalist forces on Parmenio, but Typhus and the Plague Fleet engaged it. Traitor Marines boarded the fortress, and the fighting claimed the life of Barden Davaro, chapter master of the Nova Marines. On Parmenio itself, the Ultramarines slowly gained the advantage. Guilliman killed Septicus, Kugoth's lieutenant, and shattered the demonic plague guard, giving the Emperor's servants the upper hand. With the wider campaign turning in his favor, Guilliman turned his attention to Mortarion. He led an Ultramarines relief force to Ajax, determined to confront his traitorous brother. The Plague Wars reached their climax among the ruins of the hospital world. Guilliman learned of Mortarion and Kugoth's plot by interrogating a captured demon host. Despite objections from Tetrarch Decimus Felix, the Craftworld Aldari Liaison Iliane Natase, and the Grey Knights. Knowing he was walking into a trap, Guilliman chose to face Mortarion anyway. On Ajax, Guilliman and Mortarion fought to a brutal stalemate before the demon Primarch's warp-enhanced resilience and power overwhelmed him. As Fulgrim and Magnus had done before him, Mortarion defeated Guilliman after his own ascension to demonhood. With Guilliman disabled, Mortarion infected him with the Godblight, a supernatural chaos phage capable of overcoming even the Primarch's enhanced immune system. Guilliman remained defiant as the disease consumed him. Mortarion urged him to call upon Nurgle and end the pain by pledging himself to the Plague God, as Mortarion himself had done during the Horus Heresy. Guilliman refused. As death seemed to claim him, Guilliman's soul hung between real space and the Immaterium. He experienced a strange vision of his return to Terra and his meeting with the Emperor. The vision suggested that even Guilliman did not truly understand what had happened in the throne room, except that the Emperor had fully awakened to consciousness for the first time in millennia. The Emperor reached out to Guilliman's soul. His immense psychic power flowed into the Primarch, burning the god blight from his body and restoring him to life. Mortarion fled, shocked by the purifying power of their Gene Father. Guilliman became a conduit for the Emperor's wrath. Raising the Emperor's sword, he unleashed a psychic attack that followed the connection created by the god blight into the realm of chaos itself. The assault burned a portion of Nurgle's garden and wounded Nurgle personally. After channeling that power, Guilliman collapsed into unconsciousness, exhausted by the ordeal. In the aftermath, the forces of Nurgle began losing ground across Ultramar. Mortarion and the Death Guard were recalled to the Scourge Stars, where Nurgle's real space holdings had come under attack from Khorne in the war in the Rift. The Death Guard withdrew from Ajax under cover of a virus bomb attack, and Nurgle's remaining servants retreated from Ultramar. The threat from the Scourge Stars, however, remained. Guilliman returned fully to real space on Ajax and explained the Emperor's reawakening, along with his victory over Mortarion and Nurgle, to Custodian Tribune Maldevar Colquhoun. Later, aboard the Imperial fleet in orbit, he met with the dying militant apostolic Matthew to thank him for the role he had played in the victory. During the campaign, Matthew had led an army of Ecclesiarchy Frateris militia and preached the divinity of both the Emperor and Guilliman, defying the Imperial Regent's adherence to the old Imperial truth. In the final battle, Matthew helped capture the real space portion of the Cauldron of Nurgle held by Kugath. His intense faith briefly transformed him into a living saint, allowing him to shield Imperial forces from Nurgle's corrupting energies before destroying the cauldron at the cost of his own life. Before he died, Matthew told Guilliman that the Emperor's consciousness was reawakening and preparing to return fully to mortal life. Guilliman assured the dead priest's memory that his heroism would be remembered and told to his successors. The events of the Plague Wars forced Guilliman to question his rigid adherence to the Imperial truth. He began to reconsider his atheism and the purely materialist view of the Emperor's nature. He also began questioning the Call inferior construct about the meaning of the Emperor's return to consciousness and the possibility of his divinity. After victory on Ajax, Guilliman resolved to leave the stabilized Imperium Sanctus behind and carry his forces into the Imperium Nihilus, where the defenses of mankind's darkened half were failing.